Hi, everyone. Welcome once again to Restitch America. I'm your host, Ohene-Opare, and I'm very excited to be here with you today. This is episode number 14, and I'm very excited to bring you a new friend of mine who I've been following for a long time, and her name is Irene. But before we introduce our guests, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Restitch America to be notified when new content is available. Also, be sure to connect with our guests, and you can find all the information that you need to connect with them in the description of the show. So just check them out and go follow them as well. Our guest today is Irene, and her handle on YouTube is Irene Brit USA, and you'll find out why that's the case here in a sec. But she's also on Twitter and TikTok. She is a Londoner. Is that how they say it? Londoner?
Londoner, yeah, from East London.
Okay, born and raised. Irene moved to the US after marrying an American husband, and she became a US citizen last year. And her dream is to one day sing the national anthem at a local sporting event. That's awesome.
I would
Irene
love
started
to.
making videos on TikTok during the pandemic, and she recently started a YouTube channel where she discusses conservative news. So welcome to Restitch America, Irene.
Thank you for having me. Really happy to be here and have a conversation with you guys.
Awesome. We have the pleasure to have you here. So thank you for coming. And I want to start with a couple of icebreakers. So that's how we get to know you a little more. So for our audience to get to know you a little more, let's start with these two questions. What is a funny story that your family tells about you that you would like to share?
Well, I often get roasted for having a really poor sense of direction. And I've lived in 3 different countries. And thankfully, I have gotten lost a few times, but I'm still here. When I got my new car, when I first started driving in the UK, I bought a car on eBay for £500. And my uncle went with me to pick the car up. And obviously we went in one car. And when we had to go home, he went in his car and I went in the new car. And he said, oh, it's okay, just follow me. So I was like, okay. And I was not a confident driver. I basically passed my test and didn't drive for quite, at least a couple of years. So I'm following my uncle in the middle of London. And he's like a crazy London driver. So he's in a left turn only lane and I'm following him behind. And he just goes straight. So I'm thinking, I can't follow him. I can't break the law. So he goes straight and I'm thinking, what is going on? And I have to turn left. So I got lost in driving around London for at least a couple of hours, trying to find my way back home. So I haven't been allowed to forget that. And there are some other stories of me getting lost in the outback of Australia, for example. But, God is good. I'm still, I survived those
found
experiences.
Your way.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. So to our second question, if you could go back to your 18-year-old self and you could give your 18-year-old self some advice, what would that be?
I definitely would have been more relaxed about what I studied at university. I'm from my family are Nigerian, and you were given 2 options, law or medicine. And I'm sure they would have come around, but I decided to go with law because I do like debating and, that kind of thing. So I thought it would be suitable for me. But really, I'm more of an artsy person. And I think times are changing now where parents accept if their kids are good at something, they embrace it. So I wish back then I just studied what I was passionate about, what I enjoyed, maybe something in music or somewhere connected to English, for example, English literature. And I think if you study and pursue what you truly are passionate about, you will succeed. You don't have to try and fit a certain mold and meet expectations. And now I have a younger relative who's studying art. And it's really good to see, that parents are now embracing that field. If their kids are good at it, then they encourage them to do it. And I think so I wish I had studied something that I was more interested in, but I still used it to a degree. I did teach law in high school and I did enjoy doing that, but I didn't pursue it any further than that. So, and now I'm trying to get back into doing music and, learning guitar and stuff, things
Exactly.
like that. So it's never too
That's really
late,
good to
but
hear. And as you were talking, a thought came to my mind, which is that diversity of experience and diversity of talent and diversity of thought is
right.
important. And
Yeah.
I think a lot of times people who grew up in third world countries or people who have that influence feel like, hey, I want to get out of this economic stagnation that our family has been in. And so let's go and attack the careers that are lucrative.
Yeah.
And because of that, we've created this kind of sense of a push into certain careers in Africa where the market is not there, right? And you have all these people who have graduated with this degree and they can't find any jobs because the market is not there. And a lot of people are not doing what they love. And so I like that idea of creating a world where people feel like I can pursue my talents and still be able to make something of myself, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you will succeed. If it's something you're passionate about, you'll be good at it and it will come naturally. So,
exactly.
Yeah.
All right, that's awesome. So let's move into our conversation today. So from the introduction, we learned that you are a Londoner and have recently become American.
Yeah.
And so tell us a little bit about your upbringing in London and and then maybe go through that process of eventually getting here to the US.
Sure. So I grew up in East London. My parents they moved to the UK as part of being in a Commonwealth country. A lot of people came to the UK in the 80s, a lot of Nigerians, a lot of people from the Caribbean. So I grew up in, like a working class family. Both of my parents had like government jobs, and it was always, education was drummed into me, but I also was interested in sports. I did a lot of sports when I was young, and I was an only child. I do have two younger half siblings now, but I grew up an only child, so it was just me and my parents. And I grew up with a lot of diversity. But funny enough, the schools I went to were in like Essex area, so in the outskirts of London. So the schools I went to from high school onwards were predominantly white. But I've always grown up and been surrounded with, all sorts of people. And basically, I was in the UK until after I got married at age 30. So, most of my time has been in the UK. And then what happened, I was a school teacher and I enjoyed my 6 weeks holidays. And that's when I tried to do a lot of traveling within those 6 weeks. And my friends didn't have the same amount of time off. So I started traveling by myself because it was really important to me to try and see the other side of the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I met my husband in the Philippines. So that's how I ended up meeting my husband. And he grew up in Chicago. So, he's born and raised in America. And yeah, we actually ended up getting married in the UK when we did consider making a life for ourselves in the UK. He had already had like a job interview lined up, and so we were pretty much deciding that we were going to settle in the UK. But then he had an opportunity in the US from the field that he works in, which is like engineering. And it was just, we compared the two opportunities, and the opportunities in the US were so vast. I mean, even the salaries are higher here for across the board, like school teachers and engineers. You will find that the salaries are generally higher here. And there was just a lot of, the US is so much bigger, than the UK. So there's so much choice in where you would live, where you want to, you can find somewhere that suits you as a family. There's always somewhere that you could find that will suit you. So in the end, we decided to take the opportunity to move back to the US. And that's what we ended up doing. So we lived in Arkansas, a very small town in Arkansas. Every time I tell people that, they look at me and think, oh, wow, what was that like? I'm like, it was fine. I loved it. And people were so friendly there. And there were definitely a lot more people who looked like me. So I'm in the Pacific Northwest now. And, you can't compare that to if you live in the South, you will see a lot more people who look like you. So I didn't have any issues. But then my husband ended up getting another job offer with the same company, but he was offered a transfer to Australia. So we actually ended up living in Australia for a couple of years, which, was really great experience. But again, out of the countries I've lived in, I would say that I'm very grateful to be in the US. Even what happened during the pandemic and everything, we were so relieved that we weren't living, in Australia, to be honest, because of how it all went down. So, yeah, I mean, that's how I ended up here. I became a citizen last year. And I remember in 2016, there was some travel bans. I think Trump implemented them. And, everyone was outraged. And what really struck me, though, was that green card holders were being denied access. And that was a wake-up call for me, because I'd had my green card for a while. And I was like, wow, they're turning away green card holders. And people were like, yeah, they're not citizens. So I from that moment, I said, I need to make that a priority to get my citizenship. So I want to have the same status as my family. And it really does, being a citizen, it's just not the same as being a permanent resident. You have the opportunity to get citizenship, then you should take that opportunity as soon as possible, I would say. So, I mean, I did end up having my kids and everything, and life got in the way. So I didn't get my citizenship that year, but I was so happy to finally get that all sorted out last year. So that's how I'm here today. I'm very happy to be an American citizen, and we'll see where life takes us.
Thank you so much for sharing that story. So as we were talking, one thing came to my mind, which is, what was your perception of America before you came here? And then the second question is, prior to coming here with your husband, had you visited America in the past, and what was there any cultural shock when you got here?
I had never visited America before. So, I mean, my perception of America was just growing up in the UK, everything is you're influenced by America, just like the rest of the world. So, I grew up watching all the American shows, being influenced by American music, like a lot of us were. And when you were a kid, for some reason, when I was a kid, it was like we looked at America as a huge ideal. We always used to talk about, oh, one day I'm gonna go to America, and then watching certain shows, like British soaps, you would see some of the characters, they went off to America, they left to lead a new life, so there was a sense of idealism.
I know. Yeah.
Even in the UK, definitely. And so we never really understood, though, that you can't just go and live in another country just like that. But when you're a kid, you think that you can do that. As soon as you have the money to do that, you can just go live there.
I know.
So, I had a good perception of America. I did have, as an adult, as I I guess in my mid-20s to early 30s, I ended up meeting some Americans. I had some American friends in college. One of my good friends was American she's from California. And we would kind of, we would roast one another, you would make fun of each other. If she did something a bit quirky, would be like, oh, it's because you're American, that kind of thing. And so it was nice to actually have some American friends. So that gave me a good understanding to a degree. When I first moved here, again, it was Arkansas, so completely different from the UK, especially London. You can't compare a big city like London to a small town in Arkansas. And I was about 40 minutes from Little Rock. So I still was able to go to like a bigger city. But definitely everything's so vast here. I noticed that I couldn't walk anywhere.
Yep.
I'll touch upon that when you talk about something positive to leave people, at the end.
Yeah.
That's basically connected to what I was going to say. But I had to walk to Walmart because we didn't have a car when we first moved. So I noticed that people were so surprised to see me walking. People would stop and offer me a ride because they were just like, is she okay? Really kind people, like police officers would stop for me. And I just thought, like, you can't walk anywhere here. There's no sidewalks. Like, what's that about?
Yeah.
So I felt like I was making a treacherous journey to Walmart with no sidewalks or anything, and these cars going at like 50 miles an hour just to get
Big
to the
cars
supermarket.
too.
Yeah. So that was kind of a culture shock for me. You have to drive everywhere unless you're in a city, I presume.
What about the food?
The food.
Especially in the South.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of going out to eat. My friends used to like joke about how the portions here are so big, and they would ask me if that's true. And I was like, yeah, if you order French bread, in the UK, you get 2 slices of bread with a thin layer of egg. But here, you get like 3 chunky layers of bread with cream, jam, thick layers of bread. So that was kind of funny to see. So the portions were just bigger, especially for breakfast. If you go out to breakfast in the South, you're going to need a bag, a doggy bag. It wasn't like that in the UK. So the portions were bigger, and, I enjoyed good barbecue and, food like that. I went to New Orleans. I was lucky to go there, and I love the Cajun food and everything. There's a lot of variety. So yeah, definitely enjoyed experiencing the food here.
All right. So that's great. So you started, after you got into the US, you started posting on social media. You said this was around the beginning of the pandemic, right?
Right, yes.
So you started posting on social media and started commenting on news and culture in America. And so I wanted to understand a little bit of your perspective when you got here, taking from your kind of expectations about America as, the place that had the ideal that you were looking, people, for instance, in the UK looked for, and then coming here and being immersed in the sentiment, the cultural sentiment that people have about America. And how did you navigate that? And when did you feel like I need to start speaking up about, my thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, when I first came here, I've always been active on social media, but more so just to my family and friends. So I would post, especially when I first moved here, I would post little stories that people would find funny. People not understanding me when I first moved here for some reason. Just if I go to the drive-through, I would get a completely different order from what I asked for. So I would post like quirky, stories like that. And my friends in Australia, my friends in the UK, all found those stories quite amusing. So it was kind of casual, nothing too serious that I would be posting about. And it was just a matter of adjusting to, just settling into American life, being here, the culture and everything. I mean, the only time I might post something controversial is if I'm giving my thoughts on the Second Amendment or something like that, because people in the UK and in Australia, they have a completely different mindset. They think, we're just all out here crazy about guns and, but it was my husband that explained to me the importance, of the Second Amendment, keeping the powers that be in check, when the citizens are armed too. And, so my mindset shifted in that regard and, different examples. But what happened was when the pandemic happened, I started noticing a few things that weren't adding up. And that's when I became a bit more vocal about topics that were considered controversial, I guess. And what I was finding was I was being censored like crazy. And it became very frustrating, mainly on Facebook, I would say. I wasn't very active on Twitter. And my personal posts that were just for my friends and family were being, suppressed and came with fact checkers, that kind of thing. And it makes you look a bit, yeah, it makes you look a bit crazy when there's like this is wrong all over your posts, or this is misinformation, however they said it. So I began to really just get disheartened with not being able to speak about things that are quite basic, even posting about natural immunity, for example. I got shut down. I even posting studies that I recognized, that became very frustrating. And I don't know why I went on TikTok. I think I found some TikTok videos, some funny TikTok videos. And then I realized that TikTok is not just posting funny videos. There's another side of TikTok. And that's when I found some conservative creators, content creators. And I was like, oh, wow. And that's when I eventually made my first post. I don't even know what it was. I think it was a very quick video about being in the controlled group as opposed to the group that is essentially being experimented on. And then I got a lot of replies and gained some followers, TikTok friends. And I was like, finally, even though the censorship is obviously pretty bad on TikTok too, but it was just so great to connect with people who were also seeing what I was seeing. So I think that's when I began to become more vocal, definitely during 2020, during that time.
Cool. So just to kind of elaborate a little bit, America is supposed to be the bastion of free speech, right? The place where you can't go to jail for what you say unless it's against the law, unless it's a threat that is imminent. And so for the most part, unlike places like Canada or the UK or even in Australia, there are restrictions on what you can say. And so just like you were expressing, I felt the same way. I felt like we were turning our backs against the principles and values that brought people like you and I here, like the right to be able to speak up. I grew up in a country where we did not have freedom of speech all the time. And there was a time in my country where there was a criminal libel law, which meant that from what you say, you didn't just, maybe potentially get sued for libel and pay a fine or something like that. You could go to jail for what you say. And so coming here and then seeing people here adopt those same ideas and those same tactics was very foreign to me. And so my speaking up began because I was seeing a lot of these things that Americans take for granted. I saw that, there needed to be a revival of those ideas. And we needed to do it in such a way that people could begin to listen and see from our perspective as people who understand what it means when you can't speak up. And so I was inspired, just like you were, to start speaking up a couple of years ago. And so thinking about that, what is the response you've received as you've begun to speak on topics that today are now considered more controversial? And what would you say are some of the controversial topics that you have encountered?
Well, again, it's a lot of it was connected to the pandemic. Other than we would talk about, Second Amendment. Yeah, I would say issues regarding, the jab. Even till today, I don't want to use the V word, the jab, and even things like natural immunity, which is not controversial, was made into a controversial topic. And like you were saying, people who come from different countries, I found that they were the ones who were very vocal about it, because I have friends from Cuba, for example, and they'll be like, "What is wrong with you here? What are you doing? This is not the road you want to go down." And even them talking about their experiences was controversial when they were just telling the truth. This is what they went through. That became controversial. Well, I mean, don't even get me started on the whole BLM as well. That was another huge topic, to the point where I was basically told that I wasn't Black. So I don't know what glasses prescription they're wearing, but again, being somebody from the UK, or of Nigerian descent, talking about matters related to BLM was a no-no, because you don't descend from slaves, so you have no right to speak on this. So that I had to kind of navigate that too. Even though I was just speaking as an American, a person who lives in this country and is seeing issues that I believe are hurting this country. And that's where I was coming from. I wasn't coming from a place of trying to condemn anybody or judge anybody. It was just speaking as someone who lives here and is being affected by the route that's we're going down. Especially as a parent, it affects everybody to one degree or another, regardless of where you've come from, regardless of your race. So again, speaking about issues like that got me into trouble too. And still does. Yeah, so definitely talking about issues of race, issues related to the pandemic, and the Second Amendment, I feel, seem to be the most controversial.
Those are the hot button.
Yeah.
The hot button issues. And now I think another thing that has been added to that list of, I would say, unmentionables, things that we can't speak about. One thing that has been added is also this whole debate about sexuality and gender and so on. So that's another debate. And for us who are parents, that's another frontier that we have to worry about, because this ideology is becoming pervasive across the country. And so that adds up in so many ways. And the question for us is, how do we navigate these issues without being purveyors of vitriol, right?
Yeah.
And that's one thing I'm trying to do very much, is how can we have these conversations in a rational way? How can we help people see things the way we see things? And how can we get them to at least kind of hold their perceptions about us, hold them just a little longer until they understand where we're coming from?
Yeah.
And that's been the challenge, I think. And I feel like everything is just inundated. We're inundated with so many of these things from every angle. So by the time you finish defending the Second Amendment, the next thing comes up, and people start reaching out, and a lot of times people go in guns blazing for lack of a better term, right?
Mm-hmm.
They go in ready to fight. And I remember, I've been here since 2003. And when I came
Wow.
here, the political conversation was not this toxic.
No.
It was this sense of, hey, we all want the same thing, but we have different ideas as to how we get there. And sometimes we get a little heated in, advocating for our ideas, but it was never, you can't speak because you are evil. Like, it was never that. And so it's a little disappointing to see our society turning to this idea of shutting down speech we don't like.
Yeah.
And if we can't shut it down, then we're going to, go and try to attack the advertisers of people or attack the employers so that they can take action against people whose voices we don't want to hear. And that's a huge challenge. And so from your perspective as an immigrant here, what do you think Americans who are falling into this trap of censorship and creating safe spaces, so-called safe spaces, or shutting voices down, what do you think they're not seeing?
Well, I truly believe that the pendulum swings both ways. And I think people forget that. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, the same people who were saying, it's a private company, stop complaining, were the same ones crying when the tables were turned. So again, I say the same thing about when it comes to the double standard with racial issues. If it's okay to say disparaging things about a whole race of people, when it comes to making certain comments, then understand that you may deal with the same issue yourself. So it's okay now. I find there's the double standard, the way Black people can say certain things, particularly about white people, and it's kind of acceptable to speak a certain way. But at some point, we've been in a position where we've experienced racism, and we should be against it regardless of who it's directed towards. So I feel that we need to be clear on, if it's not acceptable for one side, it shouldn't be acceptable for the other side. And that's true equality. But what we're seeing now is just people want special privileges, people want special treatment. And that's not the way to go, because then where does it stop? Where is the line drawn? So just to remember, it goes back to treat people how you want to be treated. I believe that's what at the core, that should be our the approach that we take. But unfortunately, at the moment, it's just one rule for one group and another rule for another. And it leads to frustration, to the person, to those who are on the receiving end. So
Exactly.
It's just something to remember.
That's really important to bring up, because ever since I've been here, what I've felt is that instead of seeking healing, people are seeking revenge, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
Right. And so their goal is, what we recognize and acknowledge what happened in the past. We recognize the evil that happened in the past. We recognize its impact on the real lives of people. But we also recognize that the past is in the past, and that there are opportunities today that we must seize if we're going to move ourselves forward. And we need to look forward by resting on the, I'd say, we need to look forward by resting on the gains of the past, not going back and uprooting those gains and then pretending they don't exist. Right.
Exactly.
And I think that's one of the challenges we're having, especially on the racial issue, is a lot of these people, when you come down to it, and exactly what you're talking about, which is we should be able to say this about this group of people, but they shouldn't be able to say the same to us, right? It's this idea that we want to be on top. We want to be, basically dish out the same thing that was done to us.
Right.
And whether people realize it or not, that's exactly what they're doing in their actions in a lot of ways. And if we want true equality, we definitely have to recognize that everybody, every culture has gone through difficult times. Maybe ours or theirs is the most recent they can think about, but every culture has gone through difficult times, and we need to begin to chart a path that transcends the past and moves us into the future. I think that's really important. And I know that definitely, like this morning, I received a message from someone who was a little upset with me because I posted a video on social media about something around immigration. And I'm going to ask you a question about that. But her whole message was that, well, you are from Africa, you don't get it, you don't understand what people have gone through, and so on and so forth.
I saw that.
Like, really? I mean, I've lived here for 20 years. You know, are you saying that the guy who grew up here and he's 18 years old understands things more than I do, or can see things that I can't see? And so I think at the end of the day, we have the privilege of not having the baggage. And it becomes incumbent upon us to see clearly and potentially help people see clearly too. And the way I've described it is almost like the VR glasses, the Oculus glasses. When you put it on, you see a different reality than what is actually right in front of you. And so my approach has been, I'm not going to dismiss anybody if they tell me they have this sense of oppression or something that is holding them back. I'm not going to dismiss them, because maybe they do have a version of reality that is different from mine. And so first we need to show respect. And then after we've shown respect, hopefully our path would be to help them take those glasses off, to actually see the reality in front of them, so they recognize the opportunities in front of them and take advantage of those opportunities. And
yeah, I really hope so, because I think I saw that post actually where someone said that you don't understand, if you don't descend from slaves, how will you understand? But they're discounting what you've been through on your journey to this country. And I mean, you're talking about not having freedom of speech. There's no First Amendment in Nigeria or Ghana or, Cuba, but you were born and raised here under those God-given rights that other people haven't enjoyed. So while some people, and like you said, no, do not discount how people feel. If people feel traumatized by what their ancestors went through, I'm not going to dismiss that. Absolutely not. But at the same time, there are people who have been through things that are much more recent in their countries. So when they come here, they are so grateful to be here. They probably wish they were born here and had, the opportunity from the start. So it's a matter of, like you said, not discounting people. It is what it is. If that's how somebody has reacted to learning about their history, even me, when I read books about slavery and even up until like Jim Crow, civil rights era, it makes me angry. I can remember being angry learning about that history. But if I'm looking at today, I'm so grateful for how far we've come and what America is today. I mean, we had Obama, the first Black president here. Even in the UK now, things are changing. But while America had its first Black president, other Western countries can't even think of being in that position. So America has come a long way. And I don't think it's delusional to acknowledge that. I think that's just fact. And I know people who moved here because they felt there was more opportunities here than in the UK, Black people who felt that there was a bit more kind of like elitism in the UK.
Are you suggesting we're not being hunted in America, as LeBron James says?
Yeah, believe it or not, I am suggesting perhaps we don't have to worry about that now. But yeah, it's just, like you said, it's just opening your eyes to, I do believe that some people are still mentally enslaved. And, that's a real tragedy. That still exists today, where people are enslaved mentally. So I hope with conversations and, a lot of prayer, that they will see they're a free person, and they can be free mentally too.
And thank you for sharing that. So recently, I went on Fox News and shared an opinion about a bill in Washington, D.C. Actually, it's not a bill anymore because it's actually law. And this law was set up to allow non-citizens and immigrants and potentially foreign nationals, even illegal immigrants, to vote in local elections in Washington, D.C. And I went online and spoke about it. And then I was also invited to Fox News, Fox and Friends First, and I shared my opinion about it as well. I've received mixed reviews from my perspective. Wow. And I've been trying to kind of, process that. But when you hear this idea of allowing non-citizens and immigrants, including illegal immigrants, to vote in local elections, as an immigrant yourself, what do you think about it?
Well, first of all, congratulations on your appearance. You did a really good job.
Thank you.
But what I would say is, it was unbelievable when I heard that was going into law, that was actually, a bill, much less a law. And from what I've seen, people are just shocked. American citizens are shocked to hear that that's even something that is even being considered, let alone actually about to happen. And I agreed with what you said on Fox, that it devalues the status of citizenship. One of the reasons I became a citizen was so that I could vote. And it, like I said, even when you're a green card holder, there's still a huge distinction to being a green card holder and a citizen. So to think that a person can come here illegally, and was it within 30 days?
30 days.
Right. Within 30 days, be in a position where they can vote. First of all, how are they informed enough to vote with all good conscience? How do they have enough information to decide who to vote for? What's the best, who's the best person to vote for? And yes, now it's it's in DC. I think that also is a slap in the face to citizens and to people in that local community, because it's putting the decisions of their community in the hands of essentially outsiders, because especially if they've only been here for 30 days, they are given a say and put in the same position as somebody who was either born here or became a citizen, legally. And I don't think that's right. I think that's a slap in the face. And it kind of goes with this notion of elevating everyone else but, the American people. And that's not the job of our politicians. They're supposed to work for us, but yet they're prioritizing those outside, more than the citizens.
And I think the arguments they always make is to take the emotional approach, right? And so they wrap it in this idea of equity and representation and so on. And so, and that's what they do with almost everything, is if you don't agree with this, you're not compassionate. You don't want equality. You don't want equity. If you're challenging certain books that are in school that are not appropriate for children, then you're a book burner. You support banning books, and you're not compassionate. Or if you say children should not be allowed to make permanent decisions about their bodies and mutilating their bodies, somehow you are condoning, the depression of, certain teenagers, and so on and so forth. And so they wrap these ideas in this blanket of compassion. And the message I'd like to get out into the world is that a lot more harm has been done in the name of compassion in this world than anything else. And we need to be careful when someone comes to you and they don't have anything else backing what they want to do except for the idea of compassion, because compassion can be counterfeit. And if compassion is counterfeit, then whatever it is that you are doing in the name of that counterfeit compassion can be something that actually damages people long term.
Exactly. I mean, a kid can't even get a tattoo before they're 18. And what gets me is when we see the repercussions of these things, when the chickens come home to roost, so to speak, no one is going to help those people who have been maimed, you know, by being a part of making decisions that they can't take back. You know, that applies to the jab, people who have been injured. What I'm finding is they're not given any help. The doctors gaslight them and, you know, dismiss their experience. And then we're seeing, you know, young people who've regretted going through that whole process, you know, with the whole gender thing, and they're not given any help either. They're rejected by their own community even. So yeah, like you said, where is that compassion now when it all goes wrong? Nowhere to be found.
Exactly. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. So to kind of wrap things up a little bit, what is your advice to Americans who are willing to come together to have the difficult conversations that are needed to heal this country?
Well, I think people have been conditioned to see anybody who don't agree with them as their enemy. And that's a mindset that we have to let go of, because I think that's a lie that's been drummed into people. So it's almost just take a deep breath and just hear somebody out. It may not be as combative as you think it's going to be. And, you know, that goes to everybody, whether you're conservative, Christian, liberal, you know, vote Democrat. You can sit down and have a conversation with somebody who doesn't agree with you on everything. Doesn't mean you have to look at that person as your enemy. And when it comes down to it, we're all in this together, because those, you know, the powers that be, they can turn around and say to anybody, you're not allowed to run your business. You have to shut down. They could turn around to us and say, you need to inject this into your body or you lose your job. Any of us can be in that position. And that's when it's up to the American people to say, no, that's not how this country is run. It's up to us to, you know, to not just give away our rights and to hold our politicians accountable. And I think even what's going on in East Palestine, for example, I think everybody should be outraged about that in terms of how it's being handled, no matter who you voted for, or especially if you voted for Biden, because, you know, but that shouldn't be a matter of only conservatives care about them, or only, you know, people on the right care or are talking about it. Why aren't people on the left? People on the left should be talking about it too, and should be just as outraged. And I have seen, thankfully, I have seen a couple of people on the left talking about it, and not just in terms of who's to blame, you know, but in terms of what can we do to help these people. And when it comes to things like that, politics shouldn't be the main topic of discussion. What's right is what should be discussed. So
thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So as you alluded to at the beginning of the show, we like to end all our shows by giving our audience something to do, something to think about. We don't want to be the show that riles people up and then leaves them with all this pent-up energy and with nothing to do. So what is a challenge, a positive challenge that you would love to extend to our audience over the coming week, something that they can work on?
Well, my challenge is very simple. It's just to walk more. Take every opportunity. If you can walk, then walk rather than drive, or park a bit further away from where you're going and walk the rest of the way. Because I definitely don't walk enough here, and it makes a huge difference to your mood and, just being a bit more active. We sit down all day, most of us, especially if you're a content creator. So take every opportunity to walk. I mean, it's snowing here. It's always snowing. I'll survive. And but still, even in bad weather, you can still get out there to some degree. So yeah, that's my little challenge.
All right. And I definitely need that advice. I need to walk more. I live a little bit on the outskirts of my town. And so the closest grocery store is about 13-minute drive from my house. And so I think I measured it a while back. It's about a 10K to get to my closest grocery store. So anyway, so I need to definitely walk more. But thank you so much, Irene, for coming and joining us today. We've had a great conversation, and I want to keep conversations like this going. So where can our listeners find you?
Well, I started my YouTube channel last month, and that's Irene Brit USA on YouTube, and the same handle for TikTok and also for Twitter. Well, my handle is Are You Okay page for Twitter, but I changed it to Irene Brit USA, but I can't change the actual handle. So if anyone can help me with that, maybe. But that should come up if you look for me on Twitter.
Okay, so we will post all that information at the bottom of this video and also in the podcast so people can find you. And we would love for you to come back later on. I want to gather all these creators who want to be able to think freely and share their ideas and create a collective of creators like you. So thank you so much for joining us. And to our audience, thank you so much for listening to Restitch America. Once again, please like, follow, share, and subscribe to this podcast so we can continue to create content like this for you. Thank you once again, and hope to see you next week.